But Star Wars. So Star Wars, I'm a Star Wars kid. I don't know if you were a Star Wars kid or as much of a Star Wars kid, or you like the old Star Wars.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I cut my teeth on the classics.
Because like I've shared before, like those were the first, like, when a boy became a man, like my dad, the first non-cartoon movies I ever saw, my dad went and rented those movies.
Yeah, I can't remember my first viewing of Star Wars. Like, I don't know if it was quite as like, hey, this is a big thing, but I just remember like really basically always loving it. Like I had older cousins that were into it as well, and so it was like, this is just the cool thing, and you get all the action figures and the Lego and the video games and the books that like go into detail.
Oh yeah,
of, like,
I could
the different ships.
Like back in the day, I could tell you every creature name, like alien. You know, I went totally into it. And when I had kids, I mean, they couldn't even talk yet. Like I have videos of them watching Star Wars for the first time, and just like it's a classic. Like this, their eyes are wide. Like it's when you know the Star Destroyer flies across the screen. Like love Star Wars, but some of that passion has faded a little bit because
there's been a bit of a wet towel on the fire of the Star Wars flame as of late.
It just has. I still love Star Wars for what it was, and like it's an important part of growing up. But like, it just hasn't been good. Like the show is like my enthusiasm has yeah. You know, I'm just not quite as enthusiastic or like excited when they announce a new show or things. Or like, it's like maybe I'll watch it, maybe I won't. Like if I'm gonna watch anything, I'll just go back and watch the original. But apparently, I'm not alone because sort of a story. Again, we don't want. I think this is more just leads to a wider discussion rather than just geeking out about Star Wars. So even if you don't care about Star Wars, I think there's still something here just for Christians to think about. But the most recent show that aired was Star Wars Acolyte, The Acolyte, and I will say right off the start, I did not watch the show. I had no desire to watch it. I think you watched.
I watched, I think, 2 episodes, and that was enough.
Which means you were swimming with the crowd because, according to the numbers, a lot of people tuned in for the first couple, and then it was just like a nosedive, and then not many people finished it. Just heard from a lot of people that I know you, and I know you won't like this. And I saw the trailers and said, I don't think I'll like this. So I just didn't watch it. It just did not look good to me.
Which I feel like is saying a lot coming from someone who has a podcast about pop culture. The fact that you didn't watch this, I feel like says quite a lot.
Yeah, like I could have got paid to watch this essentially.
Yeah,
and I still didn't watch it. And I'm not someone that's just being like Disney Star Wars that work. Like I liked a lot of the Rogue One and Force Awakens. Like I haven't been one of the haters necessarily, but I'm moving that direction the way things have been going. But this show again, they finished airing its first season, very divisive, and it will be the first a one and done because there's not going to be a second season. I think they teased a second season and some cliffhangers that I guess we'll never know.
Yeah,
what could have happened. So this show was canceled, and again, shows get canceled all the time. People don't watch shows; they make new shows, no money. That in itself isn't quite as big of a story. But I think what's become more of a story is just like the conversation around this of like. I feel like it reflects. It's like a mirror that reflects back a lot of just where we are as a culture and just sort of how we engage with these stories. Because there's been like people have gone to war over this, like on both sides. Like they should have canceled it halfway through the first season. Why do we even have?
What
this?
Was the point of episode 2?
And then you have the other side that is very adamant that like taking it personally that like this show is canceled and like it's wrong. We've let the haters win. And I think because of that, again, if you're not as like plugged into some of this, like the reason for that is because this show, I think like many shows in recent years, very much became like it wasn't just a show about space stuff. Like it was sort of this like cultural, like it was pulled into the culture war. Like this show represented something. Like,
I wouldn't say it was pulled into the culture war so much as it dove head first into the culture war.
It was not a reluctant.
No. It set out to be part of that war. Yeah.
Because there was talk to pull a couple of the quotes. Like before this thing came out, like a lot of the discussion, like more than just like, I wonder what characters or timeline. Like it was all about more like the wider social implications. Because director Lacey Headland, before the show or when it was announced, had made the remark that it would be coded queer. Because again, she is a queer person, and said she told in an interview that the goal was to allow her own personal experiences as a queer woman to shine through the finished product. Said there's no way that me being a queer woman is not going to be reflected in my work. I could try not to do it, but why would I? It just feels like a natural extension of what I do, is what she said at the time. So she was very much sort of pointing that direction. And like the cast too, like this was very, I mean, it was like female led and like people of color. Like it's a bunch of the social things, which like, again, some of those things in their own obviously aren't bad, but like, that was the selling point of the show. It wasn't just the show or why, the storyline. Like it was, this show represents, this is like they presented it as very much like this is our response to all you bigoted haters out there that can't deal with this stuff. Like, we're going to give it to you. And then no one took it and it got canceled. and because of that, it's become sort of the response. Because the actress star Amandla Steinberg, who plays, I think, two of the main characters who are twins in this show, she made right after it was canceled a couple of days ago, she made like a heartfelt Instagram video sort of unpacking her feelings. Again, I don't blame actors and stuff for being upset that their thing was canceled. Like,
sure.
They should be upset. That's like if I had a book or something and they're going to pull it from the shelves. Like, no issue with that.
Hopefully people care if they care about what they're doing, if they care about their job. Like, people should care if their show gets canceled. I think that's totally legitimate.
Yeah, where things start to slide into the dark side is the reason she gives for this. Because, again, you can just look at, we don't need to go through her whole video, but essentially she blames hyper-conservative bigotry. So very much, people didn't watch this show and it's canceled, not because it wasn't a good show, but because like a bunch of those bigots, those conservatives that like just hate women and people of color and the LGBTQ community and all these things, like they're the problem.
Yeah,
and you have a bunch of these haters online, and now Disney seems to just march to their drumbeat, and this is like this big, we've lost is sort of the language of this. And it's interesting because I feel like this show, it's like more out there because it's Star Wars, and like Star Wars is a huge property.
Yeah,
but like this idea just seems to be everywhere. Like I think this is just another reflection of how much like kind of pop culture is no longer just like stories. I mean, if it ever was, but like just stories, but like it's very much this sort of war. These are vehicles for ideologies and like clashing of, and to not like this one thing is not to not like that thing. It's to not like everything that it represents or its creators believe in or its actors and actresses believe in. But what are some of your thoughts? Like, are the conservative hyper bigots to blame, or?
Well, clearly that's the problem. It couldn't be any other issue with this show. But to maybe use the language of our time, I think, and I will say both sides, because we'll kind of get into this is kind of a mirror of the other side maybe of entertainment, but you see this is maybe the weaponization of entertainment or the weaponization of culture or pop culture as an example, because so much of the talk before, during, and after the show has almost nothing to do with the show itself, but it's all to do with the message of the show, what the show represents, what it means for certain kinds of people. Like none of the interviews were really like, hey, we're telling this really interesting story and we're doing some new stuff with the franchise. It was all like, this is important, go see it, because we're sort of aiming high with this show because the message is important, because these are important values or messages that we want to get out. Not so much this is a great, entertaining show or interesting story that we're telling, or nuanced story that we're telling, or worth your time to watch a story. It's like, no, we're telling this because these are important messages that the people, all the hyper-conservative bigots need to hear. And when you lead with that tells me everything that I need to know, and why I only watched 2 episodes.
And there is, this is the thing that just drives me crazy. I could go do a whole episode on a rant about this, but I won't. But I'll just tease my rant.
Half an episode.
Half an episode. But it's this. It's almost this like persecution complex of like, you see it on like social media all the time, where like someone will just throw out like the most inflammatory statement, that's this ridiculous and like this, flamethrower on what everyone's values and believes in. And then people will be like, no, that's actually a terrible take. Or like,
you're wrong.
You're wrong. And then it's like, oh, I'm so persecuted. People just coming after me. And like, it's like when people make something like a very aggressive, they make it about something, and then people like respond in kind. And then it's, oh, well, I'm just sort of this victim of this world. And it's like, well, no, like
you sort of asked for it.
Yeah, it's like if you're gonna make, like it's like this. If you're gonna make it about just sort of these ideologies and it's like this vehicle for these messages and things, like then I don't think it excuses people from being like people shouldn't be a jerk about that. And there is a lot of the hyper-conservative bigot. Like there is a segment of the culture that very much is like they hated this show the minute they heard who she was and that she was a queer lady. Like regardless of if that came into the show or not, like there is some of that. But like there's a lot of like people that didn't watch the show, and it wasn't just those people, but like just sort of that idea of like, because I feel like Christians can do that too, of like we want to speak hard truth to the culture, and we just act like a big jerk about hey, believe in Jesus, you sinless, godless heathen, you terrible person, we're gonna go burn in hell, and I guess you probably deserve it. And then it's like people,
it's like, no, that was a dumb movie.
And then people like push back, and they're just like, oh, see, well, they persecuted Jesus, they're gonna but it's sort of this idea, because like you said, in some ways this is like the secular equivalent of what we talked about a couple weeks ago, of like the Forge. Like I think this isn't just like a this political group or this Hollywood issue. Like it's become is a thing in general. Like a movie like The Forge very much it's a message, and we're going to present it, and all the press about it and like PR is going to be about the message, and like you got to like it as a Christian because of the message. Like if you don't like it, you're letting them win. Like Hollywood wins if you don't say this movie is a 5-star, changed your life.
And you probably don't love Jesus.
Yeah, and you're probably not a Christian, so you probably are one of those godless heathens. Like, and just sort of that language. Like when you step back, like it's crazy talk. Like, oh, so I'm not like to love Jesus. I gotta like this movie. I gotta like every work ever made by Christian art.
I have to have the same taste in entertainment that you have. Like,
yeah, like
that's kind of an absurd.
It's like
statement.
It's like one of the we lost in translation with the Hebrew in the Bible of like that was one of the commandments. Thou shalt like what every other Christian likes for like. But it's because we've just sort of got this because movies have become these vehicles. Like they represent things. Rather than they're just, hey, there's stories. Like, hey, some stories are good, some aren't. Some are just indifferent. You like something, I don't like that thing, and vice versa. Like, and it's just, I feel like it's just such a testament to where we are.
Yeah.
Like, we have such a hard time approaching these shows and movies from a perspective outside of just all the baggage of the culture war and the cultural stuff and politics and ideologies that everything gets reduced down to that.
Yeah, we've I think, infused politics into all of the art that we're making these days. And I think most accessibly in like movies and TV shows. And I think because of that, and now we've weaponized TV shows and movies to sort of serve this greater narrative purpose of whatever it is we believe politically, that I mean, that's what this is. Like, I'm going to make a movie and it's going to be a club to hit my political opponents with, and then my political opponents will make a movie, and now it's a club to hit us with, and it's just this very unproductive and I think secondary usage of art that is just incredibly dumb, I think.
And it's just like
at the base.
Sometimes the answer is simpler than we think. Like,
yeah,
for a show like this, was it canceled because of a bunch of bigots? Like, are there bigots and angry people on YouTube and stuff? Like, yeah,
sure.
Of course there are. There always been. Like, that's just part of what the internet is. But like, sometimes it's simpler than that. Like, this show cost like $200 million to make. Like,
and it was a bad show.
Ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah.
And like, you can't have a show that costs that much and be that divisive and have that few people watch. Like,
yeah,
like that's just a business decision. That's not they clearly hate women because a woman led that. Like,
right.
No, like they hate losing hundreds of millions of dollars, and this shows. Like, so why we're not going to do that again? Like, we're not going to. Maybe if this show was like $20 million, it's like, okay, you know what? People hate it. Some people watch it. That's fine. But like for these big productions, like they just can't do that. Like, it makes total sense to not do. I think anyone that thought they were going to do it, it would only be for the non-biz. Like, it would only be, well, we support the message and we're willing to make a terrible business decision.
Yeah.
Like, and you do see that happen.
Well, and there have been sort of political tax write-offs, essentially. It's like, we'll make this TV show or movie knowing that it's not going to make any money, but it's more profitable for us to just kind of use it as a tax write-off or some essentially equivalent of like, hey, we'll throw a few bones.
Like, it's like, you know, people on Twitter, this is going to get some applause on Twitter. People are going to really like what we're doing with these characters. Not going to make money, but you know what? We're building goodwill or something like that. Like, that does happen. But I do think, again, sometimes like just a bunch of hyper conservative bigots aren't always the problem. Like, I think it goes beyond that. And I think as Christians and just as anyone, I hope we can like learn to step back a bit and be like, you know what, it is a business. There is other factors. It's not always just our simplistic culture war. You know, if you like this, it's because you believe this outside of the movie. Sometimes it's a lot simpler than that.
Well, and I just think the reduction of art to its message, I just think it's just a bad way to look at things. And I think you end up in these places where you feel personally attacked because somebody didn't like the thing that you made when, like, it wasn't very likable. You know, messaging aside, like, you didn't execute it well. Like, and so you could look at, you know, The Forge or The Acolyte. It's like they had very strong messages. Both were very poorly executed, and they weren't entertaining. And they only succeeded in putting the message in like movie form, and that was about the extent of it. And so it's like you can not like something because that something is bad, regardless of whatever the message is behind whatever that is.
Yeah, and you just see people are just reluctant to like criticize. Like, I know that was like the Obi-Wan show, like the Reva character.
Yeah.
You know, she's like, you know, she's a woman and she's a woman of color, and like, but like, and I think the actress is fine, but like the terrible character.
Yeah,
it was like all the conversations, like people just tiptoeing around that because like, well, like, you know, like I don't hate black people, like I don't hate women, like, you know, it's like, well, of course you don't, like,
but like
I criticize a white actor, I'm not going to hate white people, like, I just think the role's bad, like, it's written bad, didn't belong, like, but just there is this sense that like because they're so equated.
Right.
We're just reluctant, right? You know, I like I like Jesus. I just don't, you know, maybe it's 1.5 thumbs up for The Forge, like, because we're so scared to like the associations. Again, that's just not how art has ever worked.